Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. And welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors. Good to have you. And let's start out with our warm-up questions, which is 4 questions. Now it's time for 4 questions, that part of the podcast when we get to know our guest a bit better by asking a few questions. Let's go. And reminding our audience members that they can add questions to the Q&A at any time, and we will answer those when we can. And again, we're all live. If you would like to join us live for future episodes, all the information is on is on my website, polarlifeconsulting.com/live. Information on how to join us is there. And for all the former episodes, including the live episodes, polarlifeconsulting.com/podcast. Daniel Eichelberger is a 49-year-old survivor of childhood sexual abuse. He writes about his experiences of CSA and depression on his blog called These Ashes, which you can find at www.theseashes.wordpress.com. He is a father of 4 boys and lives with his family in Ohio. So welcome, Daniel. Now it's time for 4 questions, that part of the podcast when we get to know our guest a bit better by asking a few questions. Let's go. And let's see. We'll start with, what is your favorite food memory?
Okay, so my favorite food memory would probably be when I was very young. We grew up without access to transportation very much, and we grew up in a small town. And on the rare occasions where we went to the adjacent, city, we would stop at McDonald's. And as a boy that didn't get to go to McDonald's very often at all, walking into a McDonald's back in the 80s and smelling the aroma of the food that just was so different than what I was used to eating just captivated me, and it stayed with me all my life. And I often say McDonald's was better back in the 80s. The food was better. So just walking into McDonald's, smelling the fries and the hamburgers cooking, and being in the land of Ronald McDonald, you saw the commercials on TV. That would probably be my favorite food memory, of just going into a McDonald's when I was little and feeling like I was really being treated.
Nice. Yes, I remember going in late elementary, like 5th or 6th grade, with a friend. We both had some money, and we went there on our own and bought our own food. And I think we had fries and something. In Oregon, where I'm from, a lot of the McDonald's will do a mountain berry shake. So it's basically blackberry milkshake, as well as one of their flavors, something that they always have, and then dipping the fries in the shake. Yes, definitely a big thing that people still do. But yes, that raspberry blackberry shake was a good memory, and plus we were just on our own. We had our own money, so yeah. And I love asking these questions because these are positive triggers that food memories are, and they taste and smell, have such deep memories in our brains. So, and usually so much emotion comes with those smells and those tastes. So I love asking that question and talking about good triggers as well. So yes, and let's see. Second question. What is your favorite Christmas or holiday memory?
Oh, that's good. Well, with Christmas, there's usually quite a few memories that come to mind, but I think the The first one that came to my mind, I would have been younger, probably kindergarten, maybe first grade, and sitting around the Christmas tree with some of my sisters and brothers and just singing carols around the tree together, just feeling the wonder and the delight of the season, with all the darkness and the cold weather outside, and we were warm inside, sitting around the beautiful tree, singing songs together. That's the one that often comes to my mind now that I'm getting a little older, when I think back to my childhood and happy holiday memories.
Excellent. Excellent. So what is your favorite church memory?
Meeting my wife.
You met in church.
Yeah, we met in church. We did. Yes. Yeah, meeting her. That would be my favorite memory.
Oh, and so tell me more. Tell us more. And we're coming close to Valentine's this week. So, yes, a nice love story would be appropriate.
Well, I mean, we met as teenagers. I was 17, and she's about 4 years younger than me. So, and then as we kind of grew older, we were in the youth group together. I was writing for a Sunday school paper that our church published, and she would write articles for the paper as well. We both kind of shared, common interests in teaching children and ministering in those ways. But yeah, so she later became, several years later, became my wife. But that has to probably be the best memory for me, is church is where I met my wife. She's been a real angel and a real rock, a real blessing to me in my recovery journey, and dealing with the pain of my childhood.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I met my wife in church as well, though later it was singles group. I was late 20s. She was early 30s. She's a little older than me. But yeah, we met. She fell in love right away. She found out he's mine. It took me about a year to catch up. But yes, those are very happy memories, learning about each other and so forth, and getting to know each other. And eventually, yeah, 33 years we've been married. How about you? How long have you guys been married?
23 years.
23 years. Excellent. Excellent. Congratulations. That's wonderful. So, what is your favorite scripture or any inspirational quote that has helped you on your spiritual journey? And what about it speaks to you?
Well, I've had a lot of favorite scriptures over the years. My favorite one comes from Exodus chapter 20, verse 21. And it's talking about Moses going up to Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments. And it says here, and the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. And the reason why that means a lot to me is because in 2012, when I went through major depression, and I couldn't really read scripture very much, I couldn't really derive comfort from the things that I was used to deriving comfort from, which was scripture reading and fellowship or the hymns of the church. I read the scripture one day and it just leapt off the page to me, and it let me know that in my darkest moment, or where things were the blackest and the darkest for me, that's where God was. Even if I couldn't feel him, or I couldn't see him with my eyes, all I could see was the darkness. That's where he was. And ever since that moment, 2012, that scripture has been a real rock for me when I've, battled recurring episodes of depression or experienced difficulties in my life.
Right. That's excellent. Excellent. Wonderful choice. So, let's hear your story. And like most stories, it doesn't have to be linear. Start wherever you need to. I know my story, when I tell it, it bounces all over the place because that's kind of how it went. So, however you would like to share, but I'd like to hear about your abuse history, whatever you would like to share, and then also your recovery journey. What brought you into healing? What has helped you so far? And we'll go from there. And again, for our audience members, if you would like to chime in with a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A. And again, be as anonymous as you wish. We will only state your name if you add it to the comment itself. So, Daniel, go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Well, I was in my late 30s when I went through a major depression. Took me a little bit of time. I look back on it now and I can see myself over a period of weeks, maybe a few months, kind of descending into this period of depression and despair in my life. There were a number of reasons for that. My wife had had a very difficult miscarriage. I almost lost her. And as she healed from that, I started to break down. And I went through a pretty horrible time, lost all emotional control there for several months in 2012. And took me a long time to kind of come up out of that. Started to feel better, over time. A few years later, I battled recurrent episodes. And one day I was praying. My family and I had come home from shopping or going somewhere, and I sent them inside the apartment where we were living at the time. And I sat out in our vehicle and I started to pray. And I was just like, Lord, this is several years later. So it's around maybe 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. And I was praying, Lord, why can't I feel normal? Why am I constantly dealing with these episodes of depression? Why can't I just feel normal? And I remember crystal clearly, this is very clear in my mind, that I had a very strong assurance, like the Lord was telling me, well, it's because you were abused as a child. You were abused. And when that thought entered my mind, it's like a light bulb just went off, because I had been sexually abused by multiple people beginning from when I was very young. And I'll get into that a little bit, until I was 14 years old. Till I was 14. When I was 14, I came to Christ and I was saved. God gave me the courage to tell the last abuser, no, I won't do this anymore with you. And then it stopped from that point on. And so as a young person, I was always kind of running from this self-conception that I had, that wondering if maybe I had been gay or homosexual or something like that, because I didn't want to be. That was my self-conception as a teenager, fighting that all the time and not understanding what happened to me. And I didn't realize, Mike, that I had all that bottled up inside me and suppressed and kind of pushed away, pushed down as I pursued Christ in my life. And as I kind of made my way towards heaven and leaving those old things behind, I never processed them. So here I am in my late 30s, which it's very common for men who were abused as children not to really start dealing with those things until they're in their 30s or 40s or 50s. So here in my late 30s, my wife's miscarriage, I think, was the straw that broke the camel's back and sent me into an emotional tailspin, that all this other stuff that had been affecting me all my life now had a way to just kind of break me down.
Right.
So when I realized this a few years later, that it was abuse, that I wasn't complicit, that I wasn't responsible for what happened to me, that was revelatory. That brought in all kinds of emotions I had never felt before. That brought about my journey of healing, processing and dealing with the pain of my childhood, and taking frank looks back at the various episodes of the abuse and processing them. It led to me eventually starting to write out my stories and blog and things like that, and get involved in communities like Husband Material, where I can connect with other men that have gone through similar things and share with them and encourage them as well in their journeys of healing. So
Right.
when I think back to the first time, it goes back very far. I can't even remember my age. I just know that I was pretty young. I may have been in kindergarten, maybe first grade. My siblings, I'm the youngest. I'm the youngest of, my mom had 10 children. So I'm the youngest. My siblings had some friends that were in high school. Some of my siblings were in high school when I was born. So they had a friend up the street that we all knew. And he was like maybe my older brother's friend from school. And we went up, he was sitting out on his porch swing. And some of us went up and we were walking up the street and to talk to him. And I remember I was a friendly child. I grew up without a dad in the home. My mom and dad divorced when I was like 3. My dad lived next door with my grandparents, but we had very little to do with him. And I never remember him being kind to me. So I was always kind of game to make friends, especially if they were males, because I needed older males in my life that weren't my brothers. And
Right.
so I remember running up to him. He picked me up and sat me on his lap. But it wasn't just his lap. He sat me on his crotch, actually, and he had an erection. And I remember that very, very distinctly, how he held me there over his erection.
Wow.
I was maybe too little to really comprehend sexual things at that point. But I remember the sensation, and I remember him doing that. And it made me feel kind of special in a way. And I don't know why, because I didn't understand any ramifications of it at the time.
Right.
Actual sexual abuse, where there was sexual contact, occurred, within just a few years of that. My mom had a boyfriend at the time that was I don't know if he was bisexual or if he was straight and just had pedophilic tendencies, but he sexually abused me, actually full on naked sexual contact. He did that several times.
Yeah, and it's actually quite common for perps to be married and have that life in addition to the pedophilia. So, yeah, regardless of whatever internal sexual preference they have beyond just children, many of them do end up getting married, and that's also becomes part of their cover as well. That, oh, he seems so normal and his wife is so nice, So yeah, that's quite common.
There were several friends of the family also. There were 2 brothers that were several years older than me. They would have been teenagers at the time, and I would have still been, under 10. They both actually sexually abused me. The one multiple times and the other a few times. Always in secret, always,
Right.
either taking me out to their house, or the one, he took me up to just a few blocks from my house. And there was a place where the city had some big concrete tunnels that they would, use to put in culverts and things like that. And he took me in there, and this happened multiple times over my young years, where they took advantage of me. There were several other adults that did as well. One was my mother's friend. She was a female, and that would have been when I was around 12 or 13. She was the only female actually that had, taken advantage of me that way. There was another, man that was a friend of the family that sexually abused me multiple times. My mom, appeared to be naive. She was from a generation where she was very trusting of people.
Right.
And she just didn't understand. She would let us go spend the weekend with this man. And sure enough, it never failed. Any night that I was there, that he would wake me up in the middle of the night and do his thing with me. And that's what I was used to. That's what I got to feeling like was affection. Something inside me knew that it was wrong, mainly because it was all done in secret, right? And that tells a child something. But you get to the point where you kind of associate sexual encounters with affection. and with being accepted. And as the youngest boy in a broken family, that's what I wanted the most, is for a male to affirm me and to love me, older male, to recognize me and to make me feel safe and accepted. And that's what I came to associate as acceptance, is abuse. My brother also, my oldest brother came out as gay. He came out fully as gay after high school, and he lived with a man for many years, and then he was kind of promiscuous or whatever. He was, my mother accepted him, of course. She loved him, and family accepted him. I didn't know him as any different than what he was.
Right.
But he abused me twice on two separate occasions when I was between 11 and probably 13.
Wow.
But when I write on my blog, a lot of times I talk about the last abuser. The last abuser was a man in the small town that I grew up in, that we met casually walking home from the grocery store one day, my mother, myself, one of my sisters, and he was sitting out on his porch and on his porch swing. And we met him, and he chatted us up or whatever. Of course, he groomed me to be his friend. And he was in his 40s at the time, so he was quite a bit an adult. And he was the last abuser. And this was the one that I write about a lot on my blog. He was the one that would take me out, come pick me up, take me out cruising in his van, park the van somewhere, abuse me in the back of the van, buy me McDonald's, take me to the arcade, spend money on me, give me money, take a real interest in my life. And he preyed on me until I was 14. So I'm going to go back to maybe I was 11 or 12. So it was over a period of several years.
Right.
We moved away from that town into an adjacent city, and he used to come over there and pick me up. And my mom was none the wiser. I would say, "Hey, Mom, I'm going with Andy," and she'd say, "Okay," and I'd run out the door and be a victim to his sexual proclivities. Again, feeling like he was my friend. This came crashing down on me after I became a Christian and at 14, and I told him I would no longer do that. He would still come pick me up, and we would still go cruising and things like that together, and he would listen to me talk. And I was trying to be a good missionary to him at my young age. I didn't know anything about being abused like that. I didn't think it was abuse. I thought it was something that I willingly engaged with him.
Right, and that's part of the grooming.
Yeah. Here I was trying to be a good missionary to him and witness to him. And all the while, he was just waiting for me to cave and to go into the back of the van every encounter. I knew that. Like, in my mind, I knew that's what he was waiting for. But I couldn't, somehow I couldn't just relinquish that friendship. That was very hard for me. And I remember one day, I felt a witness from the Holy Spirit that I had to break it off, that this was not good, that I'm not supposed to be a missionary to him. And so I told him that day that he came to pick me up, that I can't do this anymore. I don't want you to come around. I remember shutting the door to his van, and that freedom I felt by doing that I had just broken off something very detrimental to my life. But again, I still didn't think it was abuse. So in 10th grade, one of my friends was a victim of abuse herself, and she was in the foster care system. She knew him, and she had met him, and she had gone cruising with us some. So she knew who he was. And I had confessed to her the things that we had done, or that, she felt very burdened for me, and she went and told her foster mother. And then she called and reported it to the authorities. So 10th grade, I'm in one of my classes one day at the high school, and I get called down to the principal's office, which was kind of odd.
Yeah.
So I went down there, and not knowing why or what I was expecting, I wasn't a bad student. And when I walked in there, the secretary of the office, she ushered me to the back of the office to one of the conference rooms.
Right.
And when she opened the door, the conference room was just full of people, detectives, children's services caseworkers, and a tape recorder. And they sat me down and started asking me questions about the last abuser.
Wow.
And I wanted to fall through that chair and into the floor. I was so deeply mortified and embarrassed. And here I was surrounded by perfect strangers, nobody that I knew or could trust. But I knew I had to be honest. And so I answered their questions, very invasive questions.
Right, I'm sure.
And I felt like everything that I was saying was so unfair to him. I felt like everything that I was telling them was a nail in his coffin. They taped everything, of course, and then that became their case against him. They got a warrant to search his house. They handcuffed him to one of the pieces of furniture while they did.
Right.
They discovered a literal treasure trove of all kinds of incriminating material that he had collected through the years, from diaries that he had kept, details of encounters with boys, young men, and found out that he had been preying on boys and young men in my town and in an adjacent town for decades.
Wow.
He had pictures, just a treasure trove of information that they took to the bank and put him in prison. And I remember feeling so bad. I remember telling them when they were interviewing me, but it wasn't just him, it was me too. You know, it's not just him, I did this too. And they seemed like they were just ignoring what I was saying. Of course, they weren't ignoring it. You know what I mean? They knew at that point that I wasn't really responsible for what had happened. I was a minor. I couldn't
children cannot consent to those type of acts.
I didn't know that.
Right.
I didn't know that. Anyhow, I found out shortly after it came to me, many years later, that this was abuse. And I started digging into my past and facing these things with that mentality. One of the things I did was contact the victims of crime unit for the city where he was prosecuted, and learned that he had actually died in prison. Just shortly before I contacted them, maybe within a few months. So he did spend the rest of his life in prison. But he's the only abuser that was prosecuted, because, again, I didn't understand anything else. I didn't understand abuse. And my friend had only reported him because she was the only one that she knew about. So
I would like to say, for all the abusers, thank you for standing up and telling your truth that gave the authorities the information that they needed to prosecute, because so many perps go unprosecuted. And like you said, part of the grooming, they make you feel complicit, that you were part of the decision, that you gave permission for this to happen. But children cannot consent to these acts. But that's why part of the grooming, they frame it so you don't think it's abuse. But thankfully, your friend knew this was bad, this was wrong, this was not healthy for you, and reported it. Thank you so much for, even though I know that must have been so hard for little Daniel to go through, to, in that room full of strangers, to tell them what happened. So thank you.
Yeah, it was difficult. And When I found out my friend had been the one who reported it, I was pretty upset with her. I told her in no uncertain terms that I couldn't believe she had done that because I felt like she betrayed me.
Right.
When actually she was protecting me and protecting
Yeah.
others who came after me. And kind of an interesting bookend to that was, within the last few years, we've reconnected, me and her, and
Oh,
we've
nice.
yeah, we've gone out to eat with her and her husband, my wife and I, and I've told her, several times over the last while, I know that when we were young, I was angry at you. I said, but now I cannot thank you enough for having the courage to do what I did not understand to do, and for thinking about other boys. And because I didn't think about other boys, all I thought about was me, because I was groomed to believe it was a special relationship. I couldn't see clearly. She did. She took a brave step for a teenager, and she saved who knows how many, because he didn't stop abusing after me, by the way.
Right.
So
So how long was it between the abuse stopped with him and it was reported?
so 14 is when it stopped, and I want to say I was 15 when it was reported.
Okay, so maybe about a year. And
Yeah,
he had already moved
roughly a
on.
year. Yeah,
Wow.
year and a half maybe. And
Okay.
that day that I was interviewed at the high school, I came home and the detective was talking to my mother. And I walked in the door, and there's this detective that I had just talked to talking to my mother in our living room. Of course, he had a duty to
Wow.
report to my mom what had happened.
Right.
But I was so floored. I could not believe it. And here was my mom. And when he left, my mother, bless her heart, blew her stack. She exploded. I know why she did. Like, looking back on it now through an adult's eyes, I, it would not be my personal way of response, but it was hers because of her generation that she grew up in, and because she was
Right.
so afraid. And she said this at the time. She was so afraid that children's services were going to remove me from the home and take me away from
Mm.
her, because she did not know it was going on. So her immediate response was anger. Like, how could I do this? Basically, how could I put my place in the home in jeopardy by doing this? And what that did to me, like, I knew my mom loved me, but what that did to me was make me feel like it cemented in me all of the responsibility and the
Right.
guilt and the
Yeah.
shame for the abuse.
Right. Right. Wow.
That's, that was her initial response. Children's Services tried to send me to counseling. I weaseled my way out of counseling at 15. I went to the counselor twice, and the second time I went with all these scriptures written down why I didn't need counseling. And he accepted it.
Wow.
He accepted it. He's like, okay, well, if you feel like you need services, we're here, you can come back. And my mom was from the generation where you sweep things under the rug. She
Right.
was more than happy for me not to go to counseling. She wanted to forget about the whole thing. She wanted it to just all die down.
Right.
Okay. So here I am, 15. I'm in need of intense therapy. And I weaseled my way out of it. And my mom was content to let it be so. So I didn't get therapy, Mike. I did not understand anything that happened to me. Nothing. I carried the weight of that, like I said, for decades, until it finally caught up with me in my late 30s, brought me to intense emotional breakdown and despair, depression.
Right. So what brought you into recovery? And I know those guilt and shame feelings are so common, but then to have them aggravated by your mother, all that extra guilt piled on, and mom guilt is a special guilt all its own. Um,
Yes.
But so how did you start turning things around and finding help that little Daniel needed?
Well, I once I finally started understanding what happened to me was abuse, I started doing a lot of personal research into abuse, childhood sexual abuse from men. And then what helped me the most, what kind of set me on my journey, was this desire to understand my tendencies as an adult as a result of what that abuse meant, and to be free and to try to come up out of the, episodes of depression that I kept having, and the feelings of inadequacy, and all that stuff, and failure or whatever that I've had over the years.
Mhm.
I started doing a lot of research, and then I had one thing that I've been very blessed with in my life, and I thank God. I do not take this for granted at all. God is my witness how often I have thanked him for having people in my life that were willing to walk with me down the road through my depression, and then also through my discovery after I understood that I had been abused. And so I had some very solid companionship. One of my friends in the church was my rock during depression, actually. And he actually walked through this period of my life with me as well, listened to my stories, listened to me explain to him things that happened. From there, I've always been a writer. I've been a writer since I was a teenager, and God gave me the gift of words. And so I started writing down my stories and emailing them to men that I had met on online groups that deal with same-sex attraction or child sexual abuse. And then from there, I started blogging. I created my
Right.
blog, and I found that sharing my feelings, whether they were raw or reflective or sometimes even joyful, was very, very cathartic for me, and very
Right.
necessary for me to process. I process
Yeah.
things out loud. I'm not much of an internal thinker. I think out loud. And so having a mechanism of actually exploring those stories, saying how I'm feeling in this moment, has been very crucial to me, and has brought about a lot of healing to me.
Right. I know for me, in my healing, once I found Male Survivor and getting all that stuff out of my head and then onto virtual paper was so healing because yeah, I'm a very internal thinker. And so having that place where, and I hate journaling where you're writing on paper, that's just not something I do or have ever done, despite being encouraged to do that. Yeah, I can share there. Plus, I don't think linearly, so being able to edit, it's like, no, I need to add a whole paragraph. No, that needs to be. I will move things around and so forth digitally that you really can't do on pen and paper. And so I love that personally. And then once I get it out, it's out of my head, and I don't have to
So,
ruminate
yeah.
on it anymore. It's out there, and that's so healing for me, and that's why I came up with the CSA fellowship group within Husband Material. So it's a nice faith-based alternative, similar to Male Survivor, which is not faith-based,
Right.
to allow men to share their stories, get something out, but then also have that community of fellow survivors who can give that feedback. And so it sounds like you had that similar experience as well by blogging.
Yes, I did. And actually, one of the things that being able to be expressive, because I'm a very expressive, I'm a very emotional person. It's my makeup. Sometimes in my life, I felt that that's kind of a curse. It's like, Daniel, pull it together. Okay. Mostly, Mike, mostly my emotionality is a very good thing for me. I remember my friend that's, Stefan is his name. He's been my steadfast friend and a rock for me. I remember him telling me one day when I don't know if I was sobbing myself or whatever, on the phone to him, sobbing or crying or whatever, and apologizing. And he was like, look, you know what? He said, brother, at least you can express how you're feeling. Some men cannot express it. And this is a
Right.
gift. This is a gift that you can express it. And so I kind of treasure that I'm able to kind of be emotional, and I'm able to, when I write emotionally. This friend that I told you about that, reported the last abuser, that
Right.
I've reconnected with in recent years, she's read some of my blog posts. Some of them are pretty raw emotionally. And she texted me
Right.
one time. She's like, "Oh, Daniel," she's like, "you got to get therapy. You got to get help." I'm like, "No, listen, not that I don't need therapy, but what you're reading is my raw assessment of where I was in a certain period of time.
Mm.
I don't always feel in the moment like I'm expressing myself in a blog post. Okay. I'm identifying how I felt in a moment of time and putting that out there so that other men identify their feelings. And
Right.
maybe through my story, they can find themselves or find a voice that they don't feel like they have. They can find my expressing something that they don't know how to express themselves. So I can be pretty
Right.
raw emotionally. And she was like, "Oh, I don't know." She's like, "You need some help." I'm like, "No, I'm all right. But this is how I write. It's
Right.
helpful."
Right.
So yeah, so I mean, it's I still process things. I just went through a call with Drew and on Fantasy Friday, and identified a very painful memory related to abuse and self identity.
Wow.
That was very, very helpful to me to actually go through that process with Drew.
For those not
Identify,
familiar, that's Drew is part of Husband Material that both
yes,
Daniel and
sorry.
I are involved with. And Fantasy Friday is one of the coaching calls that come with the paid membership of the Husband Material Academy, where he will have a different hot seat participant each week, sharing part of their story. And then he will do some kind of healing prayer activity guidance after you share your story. And it's like this webinar where it's just the two of them, but then there'll be audience members who can comment as well. That's what Daniel's talking about. Continue, please.
Yeah, apologize, Mike. I know you from Husband Material, so I'm not even thinking about the wider audience there. But yes, so joining Husband Material Academy is actually one of my decisions this year to further my own healing, not because I struggle with porn or anything like that, because I don't, but
Right.
because I thought that the coaching that goes into men dealing with issues would be very beneficial to me. And sure enough, that call was very healing and transformative to me in ways that I was kind of surprised. And it helped me deal with a painful memory that I could not get over, that I kept pushing away, because I didn't know how to deal with it. And it gave me a forum for actually being able to express the memory and then view things through the eyes of myself when I was the age when it happened, which I've
Mm.
never done. I've never
Right.
looked at things through the eyes of the boy who went through them. I have looked at myself as an adult looking at a child, when I look at my memories, but never as the child himself.
And how did
It
that
was
change
very
things?
tremendously, tremendously. It actually gave me the ability to have compassion on
Mm.
myself where I wasn't
Right.
able to have compassion before, where there was a lot of blame. I was able actually to confront myself for the first time and along that painful memory, and hold that part of myself like I would hold my own son if it had happened to him,
Right.
because I didn't have a father in my life that held me. I don't know how to be a father to myself. And so having somebody walk you through that, help you identify the boy that you were, and view him through different eyes was quite transformative to me. And
Right.
it's just
One thing that Drew shares is the concept of older brother coaching. And he has a YouTube video describing that, and I will throw that in the show notes as well. Having the older you looking at younger you and supporting younger you. How it works, I don't know, but our minds are such where we can put that framework in our minds, and it allows this extra layer of healing to happen just by posing it in that way, that our brain can get comfort and healing from those experiences. It's amazing. I think it all goes back to neuroplasticity, that our brains are not set in stone, that they can learn and relearn and unlearn, and new synapses can form and help us to heal from all those traumatic things that we went through. So please continue.
Yeah, so I just mentioned that as a way of just saying I'm still a work in progress. I've been healing for several years. Now I'm 49, and this was in my late 30s that things finally dawned. That I went through depression, and then several years after that I started really understanding things. So, and now I just made a decision, to kind of invest in a monthly membership to HMA so I can, work through some of the harder things, the harder memories that are there that I want to kind of get through. I need someone else outside of me to help me. And I think this is true of all of us, right? If you had looked at my life before I went through depression, or before I even understood what happened to me as abuse, you wouldn't have probably even guessed that I had been abused as a child. Spiritually, I was successful. I was involved in ministry. I mean, not preaching ministry, but various ministries with children, with singing in our churches. And I had a wonderful wife and a loving family. You wouldn't have guessed that there were things wrong with my past. You could only see me, redeemed me. But underneath all of that lay this crushing burden that I was carrying forever. Being able to finally confront those things and learn the truth about myself and release guilt and shame that should never have been mine, and to understand myself now and who I truly am, not what my past seemed to say about me, has been really, really redemptive and really helpful. So I'm still a work in progress.
Oh, yeah, as we all are. And that's one thing I love about Husband Material, that though their main emphasis is on recovery from pornography addiction, it's really for all sexual brokenness issues. I was already free from porn when I joined. That was no longer an issue, but I found so much healing from my own woundedness through that ministry. So it is very powerful, recommended for anyone, regardless of your current status with struggle from porn, or if that's never been an issue for you. If you deal with sexual brokenness, it is a wonderful program for sure. And I am also one of the certified coaches there as well. There's a question from the audience. First, one of the audience members said earlier, totally resonate with you, Daniel, about sex being affection. That relationship that you're going through, it was a way of having that affection. So it was a positive experience, even though the sex may have been icky or whatever. It was still part of that affection and getting that attention from that male. And sounds like that audience members could resonate with that earlier part of your story. Another audience member says, Daniel, you said in your younger years you did not see this behavior as abusive, which goes back to the previous comment. Did some of your younger age stories hide over the years? I believe they mean, were they repressed completely, or did you always remember them?
So I would say I pretty much always carried with me the memory of those things. Now, there may have been memories that have surfaced since I started dealing with everything that maybe I just hadn't thought about for years, but nothing that has ever come to my mind has ever surprised me. So I've never dealt with repressed memories that I'm aware. Anything that's surfaced in my memory has always been something, oh yeah, I remember that. And that happened. And most of the memories are very, very vivid.
Right. It sounds like how you stated it earlier, it's like those memories, they were just put in a box, put in a drawer. So you didn't have to think about it necessarily, but they were still there.
They were still there.
Versus, yeah, mine were very much locked in a vault, a leaky vault, but it took some doing to actually get some of those recovered. So they were recovered memories, whereas yours, you just kind of put those aside. And yeah, I think that's another layer of not so much repressed memories, but yeah, you just kind of put it away and don't think about it. And I think our guest speaker last week, Ed Kay, when he was sharing, he mentioned while he was sharing, some of the things he ended up sharing were new memories, not necessarily something that was repressed that came up, but it was just something that was put away in a box, and talking about it. Oh, I can open up this box and bring this stuff forward.
Right.
And not that those memories were locked up necessarily. They were just kind of put away in a drawer or in a box temporarily, but something that could be accessed once he needed to. And that's what it sounds like, very similar to your story as well.
It's kind of like in the book of Ezekiel, where he digs in the wall. He sees a hole in the wall and he starts digging. And as he digs, he discovers more and more and more and more things that aren't good. That's kind of like would be maybe more my story. All of the things in there I recognize when I find them. They're there, but it is like sometimes you tap into one memory and it brings up another one that you may not have even thought about for years and years, but it's there, and it's very, very vivid and real.
Exactly. And any other questions from the audience, feel free to put that into the Q&A section. And anything else you would like to share with the audience about your healing journey, Daniel?
Just that it's worth every bit of effort that you put into it, even though it's painful.
Yes.
Some of my most difficult moments emotionally have been when I've written a very vulnerable blog post, or I've shared with somebody something deeply, deeply painful. Sometimes I've had that really affect me physically, literally physically, for a few days afterwards. But I've always felt like whatever consequence I face by bringing these things out in the open, in the end, the reward far outweighs the momentary discomfort that you feel. It's so important to feel like you are heard, and you can't be heard unless you take a redemptive risk and you share in a safe space or with safe people your story. Your story is important. It's worth every bit of effort you give to healing and recovery, because you are important, and you're not the sum of your past. Don't give up on yourself when you feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of whatever happened to you.
Right. That's good advice. And I continue the theme of power of story. Not only is telling your story healing for you, but when others hear it, especially other survivors, it's empowering for them to know, especially males, because that story is not out there very much at all, to know that you are not alone, that others have gone through it and have found healing. And so you're not only helping yourself heal, you're helping bring along other men who need to hear that same message about healing and hope, for sure. And thank you, Daniel. This has been wonderful. And unless there's no other questions out there, and I don't think there are, then we will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, Daniel, for this episode of Healing for Male Survivors. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled Polar. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.